Jokey dokey. Hello everyone and welcome to another month of PewDiePie's Literature Club. That's right, 2018 is just full of surprises. I've been loving reading all your comments about suggestions and what you thought about my suggestions and ideas. And it's been a great time. I had a lot of fun reading this month as well. We got a lot of stuff to go through. Did you do your homework? We're gonna discuss the books that I said I was gonna read. I think I got all of them. Why don't we just jump into it? I really gotta say though, it's been so much fun, and for me to discover how much joy you can get out of reading. I know it sounds really maybe obvious, but you always hear people say, oh, it's so important that we read, and it's so I wish more people would just read, but people never say how fun it is to read. It's like I completely forgotten. I wanted to start off with recommending this book called I Am Legend. I think this is a great book if you haven't read anything in a while and don't really know what to get into. It's very light and it's very gripping from the beginning to the end. It's a story about Robert Neville, who is the last living man, and he's bunkered up in his home because at night vampires comes out and they want his blood. They want to kill him. They sort of tease him and taunt him to get him out of his house because he's bunkered himself up in a way that they can't reach him, protecting himself with garlic and just following Neville in this horrible scenario that the vampires wants to kill him, and he can only go out during the day if it's sunny outside. Immersing myself into that horrible scenario was so wonderful in a way. I don't know how to describe it otherwise. Neville is a scientist, so he'd sort of try and make sense out of the situation, make sense out of the supernatural in a way, thinking, why are they afraid of garlic? Why do they only die if I poke them with a wooden pole? It was just really interesting to follow, and apparently this is the book that popularized anyway, that made apocalypse scenarios popular, like the zombie fad or whatever, which for someone that's so sick of that idea, this was ironically so refreshing. You may be familiar with I Am Legend because of the film with Will Smith, and he does follow it pretty similarly. I can't speak, but in the film they're zombies. There were these weird zombie thing, but it's like they're vampires. That's the point of the book. You can't just change that. Completely miss the whole idea. And the ending of this book, which I won't spoil of course, but I will tell you, it was it gave me chills. It really hit me hard. It's a very clever and interesting ending that really stuck with me, and I loved it for it. I thought it was entertaining from the beginning to the end, and that's why if you haven't read anything in a while, you can definitely get into this if you don't mind reading a horror, and I'm giving this 5 out of 5 stars. Hooray! Next up we have June, which, oh boy. I said I wanted to read more sci-fi, so a ton of you suggested that I would read June. This is apparently what people say, even here at the back it says, the greatest science fiction novel ever written. It's about this desert planet called Arrakis that contains the most valuable element in the universe, which is the spice melange, which is this spice that can be used for many different things, but it gives you the ability to increase your lifespan. It allows for interstellar travel to be possible. But to harvest this spice, you do put yourself at risk from these giant earthworms. So, and it's an extremely tough landscape. Water is a currency in itself almost. So it follows the story of Duke Leto Atreides, his wife Lady Jessica, and Paul, who gets caught up in the conflict between the houses that are trying to fight over control over the planet, because whoever controls the planet controls the universe because you control the spice. They get caught up in the conflict, and that's sort of where the story takes speed, in my opinion. It's weird because they really spoil a lot at the back of the book. I definitely don't recommend reading it in the back of the book, but I was literally 200 pages in and I thought to myself, this hasn't happened yet. We haven't gotten even here yet. So the book takes a long time to really take speed, in my opinion. But once it does, it's an amazing journey that I love taking part of. Unfortunately, there are so many names and so many concepts and so many characters that I got really lost the first few hundred pages. I think that's why people love this book so much, because it's so incredibly rich. But since I didn't pay, I think, as close attention as I could have done, I would have enjoyed the last 300 pages a lot more if I had paid more attention, because I constantly had to remind myself, oh, okay, what was that again? Oh, okay, what was that? I kept forgetting, and it was hard to, honestly, it was hard to keep track on it. Nevertheless, I loved it. I loved following the journey. It was badass, to say the least. It's interesting how Dune is such a popular and well-loved sci-fi, but it does have a film made out of it. It even has a game, I think. Maybe I'm wrong, but it never got really as popular as a lot of what it inspired. This clearly inspired Star Wars. I can see a lot of resemblance. I think Game of Thrones even... the creator of that even said himself that he was inspired by Dune. This clearly inspired so much of our entertainment, but it hasn't really reached that mass appeal. It's not nearly as big as Star Wars. I think someone said the reason why is because it doesn't really have what made sci-fi popular back at when it was written. It doesn't really have robots. It doesn't really have computers, and these were the things that people wanted out of sci-fi back in the day. So it'd be interesting if Dune somehow makes a rebound and gets remade into another film, and if that becomes popular or not. That would be really interesting. Or maybe a TV show or something like that. Since there's so many Arabic names, you can have a diverse cast in there, and studios can pat themselves on the back and be like, wow, we did such a great job. It takes place in the desert. It's about harvesting the most important element in the universe, controlled by the rich. It has a bunch of Arabic references. Are you talking about oil, perhaps, Frankie Herbie? I think this book can definitely be interpreted in different ways, even though it's really just a badass space adventure. Giving it 4 out of 5 stars. Dune was a book I said I was gonna read. Did you read it as well? Did you share my opinion about it? I'm not by any means saying what I think is right or wrong, but it'd be interesting to know. A lot of talking. I hope this is alright. I don't feel very self-centered for me to do all the talking, but please do share your ideas as well. I do wanna hear it. Now, moving on, I wanted to read Murakami, Kafka på stranden, Kafka on the Shore. I read this in Swedish because I wanted to brush up my Swedish skills, which didn't really help. Kafka on the Shore is a story about self-fulfilling prophecy. It's a story about a young boy that runs away from home, and you follow him in one chapter, and then it alternates to another character, which is an old man who's not very bright, but he can talk to cats, and he's looking for something. So you have a character running away, and then you have a character looking for something, and one at the beginning of his life and one at the end of his life. You sort of see their stories come together, but the old man can talk to cats somehow, and it's a very, very surreal story. It almost feels like a dream at times when you follow it. It is very honest and open about the fact that it's the story retold in a way, almost the story of the ancient Greek mythology of Oedipus. I think it's called Oedipus, which if you're not familiar, is the story about a king that was told to him a prophecy that his son would kill him and take over his wife. And so he banishes his son to try and stop this prophecy, but the prophecy still gets fulfilled anyway. The son ends up killing his dad, and he ends up with his wife. It's a very twisted sort of tale, and so is this book. Definitely. It's filled with metaphors, and it's categorized as surrealism, which I can definitely agree with. Because of that, I don't think this book is necessarily for everyone. I think with Murakami's storytelling, it seems that the feeling is more important than the story, the mood, and he spends a lot of time explaining and describing things that might seem trivial and that might be a bit tedious if you're not really on board. But it's funny because Murakami even admits this himself in the book. He sort of leaves you hints on how he thinks you should interpret reading, which I thought was pretty funny. Murakami's presence is very clear in this book, which I actually really like. I feel like I'm learning who he is by reading his work, which is really interesting. Even if you don't understand everything in the book and what it means, you can still draw your own conclusion, and if you're completely wrong, that's okay. That's besides the point. At least that's a hint I picked up on. Another hint was how he really does love describing things that might seem trivial, like I mentioned. And he even mentions Dickens himself, that he would spend, I don't know, 20 pages just describing how a cabin looks like. And you do get a lot of that in this book as well. Feel like I have to mention, since it is the story of self-fulfilling prophecy about ending up with the wife, his mom, it does contain incest, which genuinely disgusted me. Now, I know Murakami, he's a pervert, and so am I, but I did not appreciate those chapters. I can't even pretend that I enjoyed it. It was just disgusting. And because of that, I don't know if I should be recommending this book to everyone. I will rate this book still 4 out of 5. I still really loved it, and I really look forward to read more Murakami. I love his work. Are you still with me, everybody? Yeah! Now, after reading June and Murakami, which are pretty hefty novels, I wanted to read something more simple, something lighter. I know I made other promises of books I was gonna read, but I thought I need to break with something. So I decided to read American Psycho, which is a very dark satire comedy. And it's about Patrick Bateman, which is this Wall Street worker who is rich, he's handsome, he's charming, he's successful, he's great in every single way, but he's a psychopathic killer. So you basically get to follow the life of Patrick Bateman, his internal monologues, what he goes through every single day, and the interactions he has with other people, and just following that was so funny. I think there's like a whole chapter just describing the brands of the things in his apartment, which might sound really boring, but it was hilarious. I found myself laughing out loud so often while reading this, which was honestly great. What's really scary about this book is that how much, I don't think it's just me, I could really relate to Patrick Bateman. Maybe it's the YouTuber ego. I really thought about that a lot, how I think we've all been in the situation where, how do I describe this so I don't seem like a psychopath? If you're in a line and you're in a hurry, you immediately start thinking of everyone else as a nuisance. They're in the way, they're in your way to reach your goal. Since Patrick sees himself as such a perfect person, as such a elitist being, he really sees everyone else as a shallow person. They don't even compare to him, and I think that's what becomes his demon, because he puts himself in such high regard, everyone else becomes completely insignificant, and that becomes his pain. He wants other people to feel that pain, and it goes extremely dark and extremely graphic with its violence and gore. To me, I can understand if that would turn some people off, and I don't think I'm like, oh, I'm so edgy, I don't care, but it wasn't really that bad, I guess. I don't know. It doesn't go on overboard, at least. It's very interesting to me how, even though he's a psychopathic killer, you still really like him. And I thought a lot about why that is. Why do you like this horrible person? Is it because we do care so much about these positive traits that he does have, like he's handsome and sophisticated and rich? Or is it because you sort of just get attached because you follow along? I don't know, but it's an interesting question nevertheless. And it's a great piece of satire, and I really loved it. 4 out of 5. I recommend if you want to read a comedy. Next book. This is a book that I said I was gonna read, and I think a lot of you hopefully picked up as well, because I would love to discuss this with someone that's read it. It's Life 3.0 from Max Tegmark, which is a Swedish professor at MIT in Boston, I think. He does a lot of AI research. I wanted to read this book to learn more about AI, and Max really describes the problem that media has really twisted the idea of what we think AI is with movies and such. And anytime AI is being spoken of, you have the Terminator robots with the red eyes. And I think even in my AI video that I made, I put that as the thumbnail, which is very cringeworthy now after reading this book. But nevertheless, he's explaining that that's not how AI is going to be at all, and he goes through every single aspect of how, if we invent AI that is smarter than a human, what sort of consequence that is going to be. AI can obviously bring us a lot of positive and good things, but there's a lot of unanswered questions that we haven't dealt with yet, and some questions that are very tough. But just because they're tough doesn't mean we shouldn't think about them. Professors and researchers in AI are all kind of torn on the issue. Some people say, oh, we will invent AI smarter than human beings in 100 years. And some people are saying, no, it won't happen until maybe 1,000 years. And some people saying, no, we will never be able to do that. Theoretically, it's possible. It's not an impossible thing. And if we do invent AI that is smarter than human beings, that is going to have a massive impact on humanity. People are saying it's going to be the last invention that mankind will need to make. And it's going to not just shape humanity, but also the entire universe. And following all these steps in the book was so interesting and so immersive. It felt almost like reading a sci-fi, because some of the things discussed are just so unbelievable. The reason why it's important that we discuss these ideas about AI now is that, sure, we invented the fire and then we invented the fire extinguisher afterwards. But in the case of AI, the damage of not being prepared could lead to consequences that are way beyond us. So we need to start discussing these ideas now. The sooner the better, basically. And it's interesting because apparently this sort of issue with AI has been a very niche idea for a long time. And it's not until recently, and with the outcoming of this book as well, that it's again, thankfully, gotten speed. I think keeping that in mind, this book is incredibly important. Basically, Max talks about way before we even existed, and microorganisms and the very first set of life, and then going literally billions of years into the future and even to the end of the universe. And these were the chapters that I loved. The ending chapters, so fascinating. I feel dumbfounded almost by so much of space that I had no idea about, and I think a lot of people actually don't either. Discussing the hypothetical ideas of about Dyson spheres and how we could gather energy in a more efficient way from black holes, and all these things that just seem so impossible, but theoretically they're possible. But now with the idea that AI might be a thing in the future, it actually seemed like that could actually be a thing, and that's so cool. Learning about dark matter, which I had no idea about, and how we don't even understand what it is really, and what implications it has on where we can actually reach in space and in our universe. Learning about O'Neill's cylinders, which I've seen in like sci-fis and such. I didn't know they were a thing. So basically, if you look up, you'll have the sun in the sky, even though you're living in this, I don't know, weird structure in space orbiting. So cool. Max also talks about conscience, which I thought was really interesting, because you're almost getting into philosophical area of what does it mean to have a conscience? Can we outrule the fact that AI will have conscience or not? How do we define it? All these things I was very, very intrigued by, and I want to give this a 5-star. I feel like I should, but at the same time, when you're discussing a hypothetical scenario or a scenario that he admits may or may not ever happen, I think Max really wanted to address every single issue with AI. He really lays it all out on the table, but I found it sometimes to be a bit tedious, and I wish he spent more time on other bits, but I also understand why he did that, and I also think it led to me unexpectedly enjoy bits that I didn't think I would. So great book, really recommend it if you're interested in this sort of things. We have one more book, guys, and it's another book that I said I was gonna read. We have Beyond Good and Evil with Friedrich Nietzsche, and oh, how naive I was to think that I could read Nietzsche. I wanted to read this because I heard so much about Nietzsche, and I wanted to read philosophy. I read a lot of comments about it, people saying, dude, you can't just jump right into Beyond Good and Evil. You need to sort of ease your way into it. And it sort of made me almost scared of reading it. I was like, should I even bother? Like, what's the point? But I thought to myself, hey, I said I was going to read the book. I bought the book. Why not, even if it's too complex for me, why not give it a try? And so I tried my very best. I'm faced with 2 issues, which is the language. I think I would have done better if I read this in Swedish, maybe. I had to constantly look up words. Then again, he also, right off the bat, starts off by analyzing other philosophers, which I'm not familiar with. So it was really hard for me to really understand what he's trying to convey. Just from the beginning, I was like, whoa, okay. But nevertheless, there were bits that I really did pick up on that I thought were really interesting. For example, he points out that when we look at things like a tree, for example, we don't really look at all the details of it. We don't look at the leaves necessarily and all the branches. And Nietzsche says we do the same thing when we read something. We sort of pick the words that we can associate with things that we think we know already. Nietzsche points out that in that sense we're all artists and we're all inventors, because our knowledge is actually our own make-believe, which I thought was so true while trying to interpret this book, because the things that I actually really picked up on were the things that I could associate with things I already knew, which is very interesting. Nietzsche believes that philosophy is the philosopher's confession of his character in a way, and which I may not understand everything that was in this book, but I do know that a lot of people love Nietzsche. I felt like I could understand why people love his character, because he's very present in this book. He's very charming, I would say. Obviously, there's a lot in this about religion. He talks about how we're atheist, but we're still religious. And he points out how we don't really look at God as a father figure anymore, and we sort of replaced our religion with science, which is, oh my god, so true. Stupid Neil deGrasse Tyson. There was a lot of bits that I didn't understand at all, especially the chapters about race. He talks about the German race and how complex it is, and he talks a lot about the Jews. And I didn't really understand what he was trying to say. But what I do really like about Nietzsche, which I think I understand at least, is that his ideas come from a realist point of view. And he criticizes other philosophers that sort of try and make you feel good with their poetic ideas almost. But he wants you to analyze what your thoughts are and where they're coming from. And he also recognizes that we might think we know what the motive is behind our intentions of actions, but it's actually far more complex than we think it is, which I find myself, after reading this, trying to question myself more and what the motive behind my intentions are, and it's been a really fun mental exercise for me to try and do, actually. So I'm really glad, despite this being clearly above my reading comprehension, I'm really glad I still gave it a try and I didn't run away scared of it. So Did you read it perhaps? Did you share my ideas? What did you pick up on? What was your knowledge? I had so much fun this month while reading these, and I had a lot of fun today discussing these books with you. Thank you for letting me do that and break away to something different. I made a list of the things that I want us to read next month. I really wanted to read Moby Dick, just an old classic. I thought might be good. I wanted to read another classic, which is, my eye is so itchy, I'm sorry. The Old Man and the Sea. I also wanted to read another philosophy, and a lot of people suggested Man's Search for Meaning. I thought as well, if you maybe don't feel like reading something as long or something like that, we would read a Murakami short story. So I thought we would read Toni Takitani. So maybe we can discuss some short stories. Murakami has amazing short stories, and I think that's probably one of his strengths. That's it. I'll see you guys next month, and let me know if you picked up any of my recommendations, or if you're going to join me along on these novels. And yeah, thanks again. Really appreciate it. Please do leave a like if you enjoyed and made it this far. And bro first.